Hi guys, hello. Thank you for joining in for the tutorial number 3. And so maybe the last time we had like loads of side topics, things that in my opinion are worth mentioning, worth knowing, and although all very necessary, I feel like I might have overcomplicated things a little bit or made it a tiny bit boring and less exciting than I imagined it to be. And it's all very exciting, so I want you to be excited about those things. Let's try picking up where we left off. And the last time we talked a bit about type. A type has this bunch of characteristics that would kind of determine its behavior or like give us the properties or the methods that we could use on that specific type. So for instance, if you have numbers, the adding of two numbers would give us a sum, and adding of two strings would just concatenate them, as in that example here. So if you put 45 plus 60, you will get 105. But if you try concatenating your name and your surname, it would print out a string of characters. Because different operations for different types. Even if it's the same plus operator, it would give us a different result. We talked a bit about accessing things inside objects, like we have this like object of the highest level that is a window, and so for instance we can access any object by putting a dot after it and the name of the property or name of the method. And to make it trying to make it a little bit more vivid, a little bit more visual, I think you could imagine a building. We've got a house, that would be our object, and let's say it's got 6 windows. So if we put a building dot windows into our console, it should return 6 because the building has 6 windows. And as for a method is an action. So we could use a car. Car is an object, and let's say car dot and turn left, and the parentheses because that's a method. Or a car dot start engine, and so on and so on. So for like visual purposes, that's what you could imagine instead of those very not random but like a little bit abstract concepts of different things. You could use the examples from the real world. And finally, our target topics. So what types do we have in JavaScript? And the basic breakdown is into 2 categories. We've got those basic data types, aka primitive data types, or reference data types, aka non-primitive data types. And currently, at the moment, as of 2020, we have 6 basic data types in JS, and the reference data types are to hold more complex data and in general objects and its subtypes. Function and arrays are also objects. So, well, we could just say that in general, the reference data types, the non-primitive data types would hold objects. And that's all. That's what I need you to remember for the moment. Everything else I'll try elaborating on, I'll try explaining in a little bit more detail in just a second, or next week or the week after that. Primitive data types, for now, we've got a string number, boolean, null, undefined, symbol. We talked a little bit about a string and a number, so I suppose you should know by now. Boolean, just a true or false, not an undefined, we'll talk about soon. Symbol, in my experience, not used very much or very often, and soon to be another primitive data type, a big integer, as at the moment at the stage 3 proposal. I think the latest ECMAScript established it in June this year. So it would handle complicated mathematical operations on those huge, enormous numbers and do it in a very accurate way. That the number for now can't do it. The number is incapable of dealing with those huge numbers yet. Now, a little bit of theory. And don't be scared, don't be afraid. I know it all sounds like, what? But I will try giving examples, and as we speak, I'd like you to try to make those associations that anything that I say about the primitive types is like the opposite of the non-primitive types. So the reference types is so very, very different to what we say now. Primitive types are used to store data in a simple form. So no object, simple form. A value which is of a primitive type is stored directly in a variable. Again, it might sound like a black magic for now and very not meaningful, but it is crucial. Primitive types are not objects. Correct. But, there's always a but they do sometimes behave like ones. Because in JS, only objects have properties and methods. But as you will see in a moment, or actually we have seen it before, you can access properties of a variable that is a simple primitive type, and also perform methods. And the first thing I'd like to discuss in more detail is a string. So I'll talk about a string and also about the primitive data types in general. For a mini revision, what string is? A string is a string of characters or no characters at all. It could be just an empty quotation marks. So as long as we have quotation marks, and again, they can be either single or double or also backtick. Backtick is kind of used for a little bit different things so that you can add a name of a variable. Again, everything in its own time. String is a data that can be represented in a text form. So, for example, my name is Alice, a string. Another set of string. Another string is like whatever I put underscore, empty space, plus, minus, parentheses, numbers, commas, exclamation marks, and single quote, also good, or backticks, hello world. All good. All strings. So, primitive data types are not objects. That's the difference between primitive data types and the non-primitive data types. However, for when we need to perform an operation, we want to call a method on a string, or we want to access its property for that very brief moment, our primitive data type transforms into an object. It all happens underneath and we don't really need to do anything. But I guess if you're ever being serious about your career in programming, it's good, and I also feel like it's necessary to be an expert in your own field, to know what mechanisms are working underneath. So the JS engine would take care of it. And a string object is created in the moment we try executing a method or accessing its property. So we have this variable, city name. I'm from Poland, so I used Warsaw. And we could access the length property on that city name. That's our variable. That would return 6. Or we could use it or access it directly on Katowice, that's my home city. And it would also work giving us the number of characters, that's 8. Oops. I got a what? Since we talk about strings, we could do some more. Well, let's do some more with our characters. In that case, I created a variable name country and I put a Canada. Oh, Canada. I don't know why I always do it. I always use the uppercase method. It's not my favorite, but I guess it's good for the visual representation. Okay, country. Go country dot to uppercase. That's a method that would turn all the letters into capital letters. That's what happened. We've got some more methods. We've got like hundreds and thousands of methods for strings, but I just listed like those 3. I hope you guys will play around with them and also we'll find out what other methods for strings are. It's gonna be very useful for your future work. So we've got a car at or a char at. I think either is good to say. We've got a trim. It would remove the blank space. Index off. It would give you the position of a character that you're looking for. That's especially this one I'm using at work because you're looking for a character. Or if you want to check if the email is correct and blah blah blah. Like loads of different situations where you're using those methods. So a little bit more practice, less talk, more practice. As per usual, I'd like you to open your Chrome and blank about colon blank, and that's going to open any site for you, the empty site, website with nothing on it. Open your DevTools. Got it here. And well, for today, I would love for you to remember a few things about types. What types? How do we distinguish? How do we break down types? What are the categories? And then what's the difference between them? How would you describe them? And like the last time we said, so as I said, less talk, more practice, more code. So for now, let's play with those methods. So we've got a car at. So we have, for instance, we have a variable kitten and not a random name, Tommy. Tommy is my cat's name. He's the best. You're simply the best. Now we declared a variable and we initialized it with the name Tommy. That's a string. That's a value. That's a string. Now we can do that, all those methods on a kitten. We can put a length that would give us 5, or use one of our new methods, char at, and just give it a number. We want to find out what character is at this position of a word. So let's say 2. It gives us M. Why is it M? If we say T is first, then we get O, and then the third position is M, not a second one. Well, in JS, or I think in any programming language, we start counting from 0. So T is actually on the position 0. Then we've got 1, and then we've got 2. So M is character at 2. We could now see what a trim does. Trim, say blah. Space. As you see, I left blank space at the end. Now let's do trim, and it's just gonna trim the thing. If I do, well, if you do, bear in mind that if you do a trim and you want to I think my battery and my keyboard is low and it's playing tricks on me. We have blank space at the beginning, blank space at the end. Trim is going to work just fine. It's going to trim from the beginning and from the end. So it's kind of useful for when you create forms so that people won't leave any like white space at the beginning or at the end. It won't trim anything inside. So that's when you can use it. And the last one, index of. What is the position of a given character? So you could use it directly on a string. Let's say hello, and then index of, and then you'd have to give it a letter. So if I want to find out what's the position of a letter O, I'll put O as my argument, and the console would return 4. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be correct to give us the position number 4. And any future work, if you want to check if somebody gave us the correct email address, you can also check like if there is an index of at dot blah blah blah, then you would know that this is a correct email address. Or if you want to, you can create a function that would say return true or false, or and many different other things. And now, if you want to get rid of all of it, you could just clear the console and it's all ready to go again. So those 2 things that I wanted you to remember from today. Type. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, meaning it's not Java. In Java, you would say int, and that kind of says, hey buddy, listen, I'm gonna create a variable that is gonna store an integer number, and then the program already knows. So that's gonna be an integer, and then you can put a, I don't know, age, and then assign it to something, 12. That's not what we do in JS. They say syntax error. That's not what we do. In JavaScript, we're all a bit more chilled.
Daddy, chill.
So we put var and then age, and then let's say we could assign it to 12. So it's kind of like at this point you're telling the computer, hey buddy, I'm creating this variable, but I don't really know what I'm gonna store in it. And the program says that's all good, that's fine, it doesn't matter. For now, I'm just gonna save this space for you. And you could even say like age and just finish it with a semicolon. And the program is accepting it. It would just accept that there is this variable age and it's like an empty box. It would take it in and have nothing inside of it. But it's not a syntax error. So this is the declaration. And later on you could finally say like, listen, I actually decided and it's gonna be a number. Yeah, I wanted to have a number. Or and then I decided that actually, you know what, I still want to hold a number in it, but it's gonna be easier for me if it's as a string type. So you could put the same number but as a string, and that value is just the new value is gonna be assigned to that same variable. JS has no problem with this. It's dynamically typed because any variable can store any type, value of any type at any given time. That isn't always the case in other programming languages. The first thing is to remember, dynamically typed language. And the other thing, that's going to be about the primitive type. If I create, let's stick to the variables, because we're going to talk about, we're going to go into detail about const, let, and var, and when to use which at a later stage. And for now, let's stick to variable var. So we've got var city, and I will give it a value of Paris. Right, so we've got declaration that I'm going to create a variable, then I've got the name, and then I've got the value. The value is of a type. I'm going to repeat that 100 times. It's crucial for everyone to remember it, like when you sleep, when you run. It's just like you need to know it by heart. In JavaScript, the value is of a type. In that case, we've got a string, we got Paris, and a program will store it somewhere in its memory. It's got its own address somewhere. It's not our concern, but we know that's what happens underneath. So we got city. And now I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call it city2, and I will assign it to city. So in that moment, city2 becomes Paris. And that's no surprise there, but city is also Paris. What's important to remember is if I now say city, the first city, you are now Moscow. And what do you think? Is the city2 now, since I assigned it to city, gonna take the new value of Moscow, or is it gonna remain Paris for the time being? Well, that is the most important thing that I need you to remember from today, that primitive types, is the most important thing for today. I need you to remember that primitive types will store its own value. So city2, as you can see, this is still Paris. So I should have named it city1 and city2 because now it's confusing, but let's not focus on that. We have city1 as Paris, and it is its own entity. It's stored somewhere in the program, and then I created city2, and that in that moment when I declared city2, I assigned it I didn't make a copy of that. I made a copy of the value. It has received the value of that variable at that moment. So it became Paris. So later on, when I changed the value of and reassigned it to Moscow, it didn't affect city2 at all because it has been given the value of Paris at the moment of its creation, and it created its own very separate entity. It's got its own address. So this is the opposite and very unlike the other type that is a reference type that we will discuss later on. Reference type behaves differently, and the primitive type does exactly the thing that I just showed you. And to be honest, I think this is enough for today. It's like revision of the last topics and perhaps introduction of a few new things. And again, I strongly encourage you guys to work on your own, not only on your own pace, but also like create your own variables. It's like those concepts seem so simple, but then when you're at work and you have thousands of lines of code, it's kind of important that you assign that the value of that thing at that moment, and when you are like those hundreds of lines in the future and you're wondering why your program is not working and then the console is throwing out errors when you thought that value should be updated every single time, and then you remember, actually wait, no, because it's a primitive data type, it will not update. Thank you.